phonology, morphology, and so on. Professor Bakari is a graduate of the University of Nairobi and of University of York in England. He has been a professor since 1998 and held fellowships at various universities, among others, the University of Cologne, the University of California, the University of Cape Town, and the University of Oxford. Professor Bakari, being excerpted in so many fields of research, has obviously a long list of publications. I will mention some of the latest one, such as The Sage of Moroni, the intellectual biography of a forgotten Muslim public intellectual. He was also an editor for the book Islam in Kenya, published in 1995. And some of his articles are published in the Journal of the Institute of African and Asian Studies, as well as in the American Journal of Islamic Social Sciences and in the Critical Muslim and Islamic Africa. During his very long career, Professor Bakari has collaborated with Ali Masroui in many projects. So his research interests include the phonologies and morphologies of Bantu languages, post-colonial literature, Islam in Kenya, and the contemporary world of Turkish politics. So this is a very, very short summary of the academic life of Professor Bakari, but we are looking forward now to listen to your lecture. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. I would like just to say that this is an interesting topic, that I've been given: research in religion, context, sources, and critical historical methods. And the subtitle is Writing Islamic History in East Africa. One thing I would like to emphasize is that research in religion is no different really from any research in any field, because the researcher must need a little bit of focus. They must know what they are researching on, and whatever they are researching in, they must have a good grounding, and they must have an original idea, because it is pointless, to research by just regurgitating what has already been said. So the primary purpose of research is to advance knowledge, and knowledge is advanced by identifying aspects or areas that had not really been clarified. I mean, just to put it roughly. And when we say that research in religious studies is no different from research in other areas, what we mean is that the researcher must have a statement of the problem, and then they must have a hypothesis, and then background to the study. Why, for example, are they researching in this particular field? Why not in others? And then the researcher must have a theoretical model, must choose a theoretical model. And then here, of course, scholarship is divided between Poparians and Kuhnians, if you like. The paradigm developed by Karl Popper, which talks about falsification of theories. And of course, falsification of theories doesn't mean that you are rubbishing the theories. It simply means that we need a new paradigm. And this has been very well articulated by Thomas Kuhn in his concept of paradigm shift in his classic, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. So for any researcher, I think it is essential to have this kind of background. And then, of course, whoever is researching must not commit the cardinal sin of plagiarism. This is something that is unacceptable. In fact, it is the main thing that makes scholarship possible, that people come up with new ideas or new perspectives. If they don't have new ideas, at least they can come up with new perspectives. When we come to Islam in East Africa, then of course we must know something about history of East Africa and its various dimensions, because without this background, one will not really be able to articulate many of the aspects that they might want to articulate. So, for example, if you are looking at Islamic history here in Kenya, then you need to know something about the history of the country. So classic works by, for example, Sorensen, The Origins of European Settlement in Kenya, this is essential reading. And also the book by Professor Salim, The Swahili-Speaking Peoples of Kenya's Coast, from 1895 to 1965, published by East African Publishing House. And then there are other scholars also. These are of literary bent, like Professor Mohamed Hassan Abdulaziz Muyaka, and then Hitchens in Kishafi, that were published several decades back. So if we are serious researchers, then this is the kind of background, you know, that we should have. Because without this background, then many of these things will be, will be missed. So, for example, there must be, as we said, a hypothesis, statement of the problem, and then the theoretical models that the researchers are going to take. So research in religion is no different from research in other areas. In my own experience, we tend to have these parochial approaches, you know, to these religions. Like, for example, if you look at Christianity, it is always presented as a European religion. And this is rather ironic. And because Christianity comes from the same sources as Islam and Judaism. These are all Middle Eastern religions, but they are packaged, you know, as European religions. And then, of course, this becomes problematic. How does it become problematic? It becomes problematic because the impression that is created is that these religions are perpetually at war or in conflict, in fact, which is really farther from the truth. And especially in our region, East Africa, you find that Muslims have intermarried with Christians, Christians have intermarried with Muslims, and so on and so forth. So their perception of Muslims is completely different from that brought, for example, from Europe, where Christianity is cast as a European religion. So I think this is something that we have to always bear in mind, and I think it's one of the sources of conflict, because there really doesn't need to be any conflict as such. When it comes to how we look at these paradigms, the paradigms that we adopt to describe these religions, there's this concept of falsification by Karl Popper. And falsification, as we said earlier, doesn't mean rubbishing the other side. It simply means that there's a new perspective, to an issue. That by falsifying an existing theory, which might go on for a long time, then we are able actually to find new insights. And this is what Thomas Kuhn calls a paradigm shift in his Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And then, of course, the paradigms come about, or the paradigm shift comes about because of the conservativeness of some scholars. Some scholars would just like to work within that paradigm that they have always worked in, and they don't want to give an opportunity to other ways of thinking. So I think we must also do the same thing here in East Africa. When looking at what has been written on Islam in East Africa, we have to judge it according to these criteria. There are certain texts that we need to know that students must read before they embark on the research. And one of those important works is Umberto Eco's How to Write a Thesis by MIT Press. Here, Umberto Eco recognizes that different people have different reasons for researching a particular aspect. Not everybody who researches is going to end up writing a PhD thesis or becoming an academic. So that's an important point, which he makes. So every researcher or every student must read Umberto Eco's How to Write a Thesis. And then the Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. I think this is an essential text because it explains to us how paradigms shift over time. One theory overtakes another one. And then there are also other interesting texts, like the one by J.N. Ogilvy, Our Empire's Debt to Missions. This is the Duff Missionary Lecture that was given in 1923 and is published by Hodder and Straffen. This is a very interesting article because it shows how political clout is used by religious institutions in order to advance their objectives. And these objectives are not always positive. In fact, it's one of those I would call a very alarming text, for anybody to read, and especially an African or somebody from the third world. When they read this, then you get an extremely depressed view of things, because you feel that this is how others actually see us, and this is not exactly how we see ourselves. I think I would like to stop there, and then if there are any questions or discussions, I'll be happy to welcome them. Ilaria.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Bakari. This is, you reminded us how it is important to be very well grounded in also in the knowledge of the historical context we want to research. And especially for our European students, we usually do not know, and as professor, we also do not teach enough about Africa. So actually, my first question is for you, Professor, whether you could elaborate a little bit more and explain us which are the main characteristics of Islam in East Africa, and especially which are the main influences on the evolution of Islam in East Africa. So for now, to back to contextualize the topic of today.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Ilaria. Islam came to East Africa actually from different sources. There was the direction from Yemen, and also the direction north from Somalia. So that's why we find Islam is predominantly of the Shafi rite. The majority of the Muslims here are Shafi, which doesn't mean that there are no other denominations. For example, it might surprise some people to say that there are even Malikis, in East Africa. But the Malikis are confined to the Nubians of Kibra.
Professor,
yes.
might I stop you? Could you please introduce these notions that maybe some of the students they are not well acquainted with them? So what is Shafi? What is Maliki? And just to give a little bit an introduction on this.
Yeah, sure. These are the main denominations that survived, historically. They are the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali. These were the more triumphal denominations that spread. So within the Islamic world, different parts would belong to these different denominations. As I said, for example, in East Africa is predominantly Shafi because Islam came through Yemen and also through northern Somalia. So because these people were Shafi themselves, they brought the Shafi rite. And as I said, as I mentioned, the Maliki are a minority here. and they are just confined to people in Kibra because they were brought here by the colonial state, and because of that, they also came with their own traditions. And one of the traditions was the Maliki rite. Although the Malikis are widespread in North Africa and West Africa. In fact, without exception, almost everybody in North Africa and West Africa are Maliki. So the Nubians in Nairobi and other parts of Kenya find themselves in a minority state. And then you also have Shias, and then again the Shias are divided into their various groups. So Kenya is a very complex place, when it comes to Islam. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I decided way back in the 90s to organize a national conference, a national seminar on contemporary Islam in Kenya. And that was because Kenyan Muslims had no idea about themselves, their numbers, their institutions. So I felt, I think, it's not only Muslims, but also the non-Muslims, need to know something about the Muslims here. Because if we have any prejudices, of course, every prejudice is rooted in ignorance. If you are ignorant, then you fear needlessly. But if you are informed, then you are able to make the necessary adjustments. And the result of that conference was the publication of these texts. I hope you can see it. Islam in Kenya, where I mobilized everyone interested in any aspect of Kenyan Islam, which included my non-Muslim students, who are now doing quite well themselves, and some are even heads of departments of religious studies. This gave a lot of basic information to both Muslims and non-Muslims. So this is an essential text for anybody wanting to know something about Islam in Kenya, because there are social, political, economic, educational, religious issues tackled by a whole cross-section of Kenyan society, both Muslims and non-Muslims. So this is something that shows how well integrated Muslims and non-Muslims are, and how they work together. So, for example, the unfortunate incidents that happened just yesterday in Kibera, where presumed Christians torched mosques, and Muslims torched churches. I do not ever believe, that this was actually done by Muslims and Christians themselves. This is something that must have been instigated by politicians, So otherwise, we have lived for centuries very amicably, and the point is, Islam has been here, for 1,000 years. In fact, there's a very interesting article that has just come out, published by in Nature magazine, that talks about Swahili DNA that goes back 1,000 years, and this was not done by the Swahili themselves, this was done by geneticists, who are looking at the DNA of Swahili, and they said that this corroborated what the Swahili themselves, the Swahili views about themselves, not about what others, thought about them. So this is just a good example, and it is in Nature magazine, one of the most influential scientific magazines. So I think that should satisfy at least part of the explanation.
If going back to to this publication, to this book of yours, Professor, what are the main findings? If we look at for example, at the intellectual trajectory of Muslims in Eastern Africa. Professor, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. Yes. Yeah.
I was asking if you could tell us what the most important findings of your book, Islam in Kenya, especially related to the intellectual trajectory. What are the main trends nowadays that lead the Muslim minority in the country?
Yeah. Muslims in Kenya are not as insular as we imagine them. They are very well connected to other outside ideologies and so on and so forth. I think this is something that they cannot avoid. But I think they are quite clear who they are, and they are not as influenced as we imagine, by external radical ideologies and so on and so forth. Of course, some people will always try to take advantage of that, but otherwise, in terms of intellectual connections, Muslims read widely. And just to give you a simple example, I have a library here of 3,000 books, across all areas. So not only Islamic, and we have there, just behind me, texts that concentrate on aspects of Islam. But we have texts by, by non-Muslims, by Christians, by atheists. One of my favorite books here is the biography of the daughter of Karl Marx. One of the most interesting books, that you can read. And then people of my generation are also fairly well educated, and we are educated here, in this country. So we know exactly, what is happening, and we've gone to school with people from diverse backgrounds. So as far as I'm concerned, we are quite at home in our own country. Yes, any other question?
Well, in the meantime, while we wait for the other participants to jump in, I'd like to ask another question, Professor, related to the context. You mentioned at the beginning of your lecture that context is pretty important, and one, in order to understand the history of religion in Kenya, needs to know history of Kenya. And one of the books you mentioned was about European colonialism. Can I ask you how European colonialism affected Islam, the way Islam was thought and evolved and developed throughout the 20th century in Kenya? Or it wasn't affected at all by colonialism?
I think the colonialists hid behind Christianity and recruited it, as an edifying aspect of society. And of course, you can't do that without demonizing Islam and Muslims. I think that was the strategy. But as I said, Christianity is not exactly a European religion, although it has, it has the same origins as Islam, as Judaism. These are that's why they're called Abrahamic religions. But the impression, that is created is that Christianity is our religion, is a white man's religion. And if you want to be civilized, become one. But everybody knows that these are not really distinctive people, because Europeans themselves are Asians, they call themselves Caucasians. And they have the same origins, as other Asian peoples. They came from Central Asia. One group moved eastwards, and that is the group that populated northern India. And another one came and populated the area that we call Europe now. So that is why they call themselves Indo-Europeans, because they already saw that they had affinities with these people. Although initially they had exaggerated views about themselves, that they are distinctive, until they saw parallels between for example, Farsi and other languages. When they saw the structure, they realized that we have so much in common, with these other groups. So I think that made them more humble, in the views about themselves. But of course, everybody thinks they are superior to everybody else. So this is just a basic human tendency. So people that you think are inferior don't have that view about themselves. So I think this is the reality.
Professor, I have another question. As you know, I work a lot on the history of Christian missions in Kenya. I was wondering about 2 lessons ago, we had Professor Filomena Mwaura, who was teaching us about the new Christian movements in East Africa and in Kenya. And she told us how those new Christian movement and Pentecostal churches, they were a response of, African religiosity to actually the colonial imposition of Christianity. And they said that they are so very much influenced by the African traditional religion, ordered by the Kiswahili culture that we find only in East Africa or if it's expanding also to other places of the world now?
I think there's this very important book edited by Professor Ogot and Father Welborn. It's called A Place to Feel at Home, about these traditional African churches. So that is more or less the same kind of response, you know, because the missionaries, when the missionaries came, as I said earlier, they cast Christianity, you know, as a European religion, and that if you want to become civilized or whatever, then you must become one. But a lot of people realize also that you don't have to be white, you know, you don't have to be an Englishman or whatever, you know, to be a Christian. So that's quite an important book. You know, it sets the context, and that is why you also had these dissenting African voices, you know, of people wanting to go back to their own belief systems. So you have Dinia Misambwa, you know, these are people who believe in their own traditional beliefs. And in fact, that is why, you know, you have this diversity. So people have become better educated and more self-confident, and they no longer associate, for example, Christianity, you know, with colonialism or whatever, you know, ideology, you know, that considers itself as superior. So I think this has been a good force.
And what about the influence of traditional beliefs, if there is any, on Islam in East Africa? Is there any? There is also an encounter, a dialogue between?
Often there is always religious syncretism. I just wonder if you hear me. Can you hear me, Ilaria?
Sorry, Professor, we missed your answer because there was a small connection problem. If you could repeat, please.
Yeah, I said there is religious syncretism, you know, where two traditions are assumed in communities. So, for example, you will find people going to the church, you know, for funeral, and then after that, you know, they go and celebrate, you know, rituals, because to them, you know, these are people who have gone to join their ancestors. So it's not something to be sad about, you know. So there are different perceptions. So, and religious syncretism is quite common. And again, amongst Muslims also, you find more or less the same kind of thing. You know, they'll go to the mosque and, you know, they pray, you know, they will follow everything. They will fast the month of Ramadan, like now. But they might not be averse to going and consulting, you know, a palmist or an astrologer, of course, discreetly. So I think this is the reality. And I found the same thing, actually, even amongst those who call themselves, for example, atheists or secularists. You know, I had a very good friend, and he was an American of French background, and one day he said, "Can we?" Yeah, I found that a bit odd. You know, somebody who is an atheist wanting to go to a palmist, you know, to go and read wanted the palmist to read their palms and also to believe in astrology. So religion is so much part of human nature that we cannot really suppress it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I think there is also another question from Aloysius, our coordinator and student.
Thank you. Professor, I was wondering, you mentioned earlier about how there's obviously evidence that there doesn't need to be conflict between Christianity and Islam based on the history of Kenya. And you mentioned there have been several marriages between the two religions. And I was just wondering, maybe you could give us an insight on a typical marriage, like if you have experience of seeing such interactions, how those marriages work.
I couldn't hear the last bit. Sorry.
Sorry. No, it's okay. I was saying for these intermarriages, maybe if you could give us some insight, how do they go about maintaining harmony? Or are there strategies they have for how they go about worship, for instance? Maybe raising a family, belief systems in a way to maintain that sort of unity. Maybe
I think
you can speak about
I think the fundamental thing here is respect, you know, for the other's belief system. You know, that these things should not be dragged into family conflicts and related issues. So I have never seen in a family where you have half the family Christian and half the family Muslim coming to blows. You know, I think it's they might have jokes, you know, about each other, but you know, hardly do the exchanges become acrimonious and cut off, you know, relations, you know, between the groups. And this, I think, I ascribe to this fundamental respect, you know, for the other, whether the other is an outsider or somebody, you know, close to you, because ultimately, as we pointed out, we are all human, you know, and whatever we, you know, whatever prejudices we might have, we are fundamentally the same, and we also have a deep desire to believe in something. So again, it's not surprising that within a family you find a Muslim, a Christian, an atheist, and an agnostic, you know, within the same family. This is quite normal, and I think this is also true in some other places.
Thank you, Professor. Are there other questions?
Yes,
because
please.
I have, yes, please, Patrick Tabaro, Professor Bakari.
Yes, thank you. I'm Tabaro Patrick. I'm studying at Angelicum, doctorate candidate in interreligious dialogue. I would like to know if talking about the Islamic law, especially the jurisprudence, Islamic jurisprudence. The professor talked about the impact of those, let's say, local practice about Islamic, when the local laws could interact with the Islamic law at the, let's talk about the fiqh. I know the professor talked about the way in which the local one of local practice could interact with the Islamic practice, especially when the local practice can become one part of the law or the Islamic law. There is a term I'm looking for, the urf. Urf in Arab is one local practice which become one part of the Islamic law. I don't know if the professor is catching me what I want to say. I want to know, in the east part of Africa, let's talk about Kenya, are there some practices, local practices? We can talk about those practices which became part of the Islamic law, the urf. I don't know if you have got the point.
Yes, I have. I've got the point, Malimu. The concept of urf is anything that is acceptable and that doesn't go against Islamic law. So that is naturally accepted. So, for example, in Islamic law, you have to give bride wealth. But if the local practice is to, in cash, but if the local practice is to give, for example, blankets or something else, you can do that. There's that flexibility. There's nothing wrong, with that. Talking about fiqh, there's not one fiqh tradition. There are different approaches to fiqh, depending upon madhab, the context,
the doctrines.
So there's a very important text by Said Hossein Nasser, probably one of the most prominent Muslims in the US. It's called, this was a series of lectures that he gave at American University of Beirut. It's called Ideals and Realities of Islam. Ideals and Realities of Islam. And it tackles many of these issues. And if you read also his other subsequent writings, he amplifies on this. Just to give you an interesting anecdote, there is this famous Muslim translator of the Quran into French. So he was asked, what do you think about Islamic law or the Islamic State? And then he said, we as individual Muslims, if we practice Islam in the manner that it is expected to be practiced, then each collectively, our individual practices, that would create the Islamic State. It's not just something, that you have to put pillars here and there, and objections here and there. So this is the fundamental point, that there's really no one way, of looking at things. But of course, some people politicize Islam as much as other people also politicize Judaism. They politicize Christianity. This is not beyond, human imagination. So I think what we need to do is to try and learn as much as we can about different traditions. I read a lot about Christianity. I know a lot about the history of the faith, because, like, for example, as a student of literature, almost everything, from the 12th century to almost the early part of the 20th century in English literature is just about Christianity, because that was the paradigm in which they were working. So if you look at Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, what is that?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So it's essential, to be broad-minded and to learn about other traditions. We must know something about, for example, Hinduism, because otherwise, how will we understand, the caste system, how it came about, and one of the best books on the caste system in India was actually written by a Muslim, who went to study Indian mathematics and astronomy, and interacted, with the Brahmin, and looked at them and interacted with them respectfully, and then understood the Hindu way, and wrote this book that is highly regarded, by the Hindus themselves. Nobody has really written, this is Al-Biruni. If you go and if you go and read Al-Biruni's account, of India, it's really unmatched by anybody. And he did convert, to Hinduism. He remained a very important Muslim intellectual, mathematician and astronomer. I hope that satisfies you.
Yeah, very satisfied. Thank you, Professor.
Professor Bakari, I think we can have now a 5 minutes break because I didn't want to interrupt you in your answer. And then we come back after 5 minutes break with some more question and interaction with you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Sure, let's do that.
Thank you.
Yes,